In Under the Skin, Jonathan Glazer has created a sci-fi film for the feelings of hopelessness, mundanity, and existentialism that haunt those living in the 21st century. He does so by placing a Hollywood star as an alien in dreary Glasgow, giving us an opportunity to witness our world from the perspective of an outsider, something that we do not get the chance to do if we have to live within it. By showing, and then deconstructing, human behaviour, speech and culture, the film makes the most human of actions seem inhuman, and their true meanings remain only as spectres that haunt the film. As Laura hunts down her male victims, she appears to take on some human traits herself, but these hauntings and fragments of society are not enough to overcome the inherently evil and, unfortunately, inherently human cruelty of sexual violence that she faces. It encapsulates the modern anxieties of human life and the inevitability of regressing into our past. As Johansson drives through the streets of the city, we can't help but feel the mundanity and bleakness of this location, and this is precisely the point. If the film is a reflection on how we live, why not use the most normal of locations to represent this? As Peter Bradshaw writes, a Hollywood A-lister is as much of an alien here as any extraterrestrial from a flying saucer.
But the aesthetic wasn't important to me on this film, actually. The aesthetic was that there was no aesthetic, actually. And everything, the word that we kept using was unadorned.
We are put into the position of voyeur, and this feeling is only accentuated when we discover the way in which the film was shot.
Like, put her in disguise, put someone we are familiar with in disguise, drop them in the real world, and walk away. Hide your cameras and walk away.
Both the main actor, Scarlett, and her victims would not be aware of which camera was filming them, and they would ideally not be aware of the cameras at all.
A couple of people have said to me, who's cast and who's not cast, and that's let's leave it at that. You know, that's exactly where you want it to be, because it means that the unity of those ingredients is in check. You know,
this meta-cinematic point connects us directly to the character, but before we've even met her, the film suggests this connection, with us feeling that we are being watched as a species. In the first sequence of the film, we see a small white dot increasing in size, and Mika Levy's score slowly crescendos. Both sound and cinematography are connected here, and we are expecting this to continue. But suddenly, this connection is broken, and light fills the screen, giving the impression that we are being watched. Like a camera flash, it's dazzling us through the screen. This jarring moment immediately makes the viewer feel uncomfortable, and the theme of voyeurism is set up straight away. Instead of us looking into a strange futuristic world, in Glazer's science fiction, it is our own world that is being watched. There is a conflict between the realism of the setting of the film and the stylized sequences and themes of alien life. The sequences in the dark void are visually very different to the shots of streets and cold roads, but Mika Levy's score remains consistent throughout, meaning that we automatically merge the two in our minds. As the film progresses, these more obviously disturbing scenes in the void disappear entirely, leaving us with only the true human horrors instead. The true merging between the science fiction and the natural human world only occurs when Laura's disguise is literally ripped from her by human cruelty. Laura's failing to become fully human should be no surprise to viewers. While the film shows Laura slowly becoming more acquainted with human life, our position does remain as voyeuristic. Glazer deconstructs our actions, voices, and culture to such an extent that all we are left with is a spectre of ourselves, and this results in a constant haunting throughout the film. One of the most useful ways in which to view this haunting is through the ideas of Mark Fisher and his writings on hauntology. In his book, Ghosts of My Life, Fisher reflects on how we are not always haunted by the past, but also by the promises of a future that never came into fruition. He notes how, especially in sci-fi and electronic music. We are increasingly returning to old techniques and genres, and the progression to new music or art is far slower than it was in the 1970s or 80s. It ditches the neon lights and flying cars of films such as Blade Runner, and instead places us in our very own dreary world and only allows us to move through it at a slow wander, much in the way that electronic music has begun in the 21st century to look inwards rather than outwards. Sci-fi in this film is doing the same. Returning to the first sequences of the film, we hear a female voice, presumably piecing together sounds to make English words. This is the first speech we hear in the film, and it is immediately disorientating. The fact that this sequence opens the film suggests that speech is of utmost importance to the human experience. This has been explored before in art, and specifically in electronic music. For example, in Boards of Canada's The Colour of the Fire, we hear what sounds like a robot trying to put together the words, "I love you." It repeatedly sounds out the word, making us question the function of language and why certain phrases have so much impact in our society. Without the right inflection or pronunciation, words cannot survive and can only haunt spaces, devoid of their meaning unless in the correct context. The thick dialect of the Scottish characters is perhaps another comment on language.
You catch your death of cold if you've not got a jacket or a hat or something on.
And its difficulty to be understood by non-Scottish people further isolates Johansson's character with her posh London accent, as well as the audience, who may be struggling to understand their own English language.
Alright, thank you.
Glazer once again deconstructs a distinctly human thing, so that it no longer feels full and only remains as a ghostly presence. Some have compared the opening to Under the Skin to Kubrick, and I too was reminded of the sequence in 2001: A Space Odyssey, in which Dave disconnects Hal, causing us to see the process of learning speech, but in reverse, and dehumanizing something that has been designed to be as human as possible.
My mind is going.
We are almost convinced that Hal is human before we see that he is just as programmed as any other computer software, whereas in this film, we know from the start that Laura is not human. Where 2001 explores humanity by pushing it to the furthest reaches of space, Under the Skin does the opposite.
The craft was her, the spaceship was her. So that was our science fiction. She's our science fiction. She's our science fiction.
We see Johansson's character learn new human noises, and these sometimes haunt her, but do not necessarily change her. In the sequence on the beach, in which she leaves a baby alone to die, she appears to show no emotion. The sound of crying is incredibly uncomfortable to the viewers, but to this non-human character, the sound is just another sound. In a scene soon after, the character appears to be haunted by this sound, perhaps signalling regret. A subtler example takes place in the club. We see a shot of a packed club with heavy dance music, and people dancing in a huge crowd, before it cuts to the void, and the man dancing is isolated completely. We see his movements entirely separated from their context, with the lighting leaving him exposed in contrast to the black backdrop of the shot. This makes the action seem inhuman, and leaves the movement only as a spectre of what it once was. And we reflect on what separates human beings from other species. Under the Skin doesn't necessarily answer any questions about humanity conclusively, and this dissatisfaction is what makes the film so uncomfortable to watch. It confirms Mark Fisher's theory that futuristic art is no longer effective in our time, and instead observes our cultural past and present before going against all expectations that we might have of the direction the film is going. We watch an alien slowly learn how to become human, and as this becomes clearer to her, it becomes stranger to us. Yet, While other films might lead us to expect that she will reach this goal, she does not. And so all we are left with is a series of disconnected human interactions, and a development cut short by human cruelty. This lack of satisfying conclusion makes us realise the futility of searching for meaning in our world, and this realisation haunts us long after the final shots.